Hello, this is Angela with Parkrose Permaculture. My hat has a little bit of a jaunty bent to it today. So it's a beautiful sunny day here in Portland, Oregon. It is mid-August, and that means it is the beginning of the late plum season for me. So I have some early plums, early Laxton in the front yard that are way done. And I have some plums that won't be ready until late September, like my damsons, and then I have an Italian prune in the front yard. But also in the front yard, I have a Stanley plum. Stanley is a fantastic plum. I'm gonna do a video on it as soon as I'm done here. But I'm coming out to pick plums, and I'm sitting down to put my shoes on, and I noticed something. So I think it's what I'm gonna make a video on today for Hausfrau Friday. Hang on a second. Making my own clothes. So because I'm quite tall and also have wide hips, you know, store-bought clothes often don't fit well, and I enjoy sewing. So I made this skirt by hand, but part of using natural fiber materials is that I typically use either cotton or linen thread. Linen thread is very strong. And on nicer garments, I use silk. But on this one, I use cotton, and it's not as durable as polyester. But when you use a polyester or cotton poly blend thread, you can't compost the garment at the end of its life. And if you look at this skirt, I got this mill end linen. It was like the end of a bolt. It was super cheap. You can see here the inside of the skirt. I don't know if it'll show on camera how much use this skirt has gotten. I wear it all the time. Do you see how dark green the inside is? It may not show up on camera, but boy, oh boy, the outside of the skirt is super faded. It's much more yellowy. This moss green. I love this skirt. I'm thinking about whether I want to mend this or I want to actually deconstruct it and flip it inside out so I can have the unfaded side. Maybe now the sun's going in, it'll be a little bit more obvious. This is much more of a bluey green, and this is faded to kind of a yellow. Or if I'm just going to keep it as is. This is my favorite gardening skirt. It's my favorite hiking skirt. But obviously I need to mend this little bit here. But just so I think I'm going to do that for my Hausfrau Friday video today and talk a little bit with y'all. It's a gorgeous evening here in Portland, Oregon. I am sitting in my backyard. I normally would have a gardening video, but today is Friday. And on Fridays, I have a special segment called Hausfrau Friday, where I talk about the ways that the permaculture ethics of earth care, people care, and fair share interplay with our domestic lives. And my videos are not just for homemakers, despite this segment being called Hausfrau Friday. Everybody has a home that we have to take care of. And permaculture is not just gardening, right? Everybody has a home. And if we're interested in sustainable living, if we're interested in regenerative living, what better place to start than where we live, where we spend the majority of our time, use the majority of our resources. Now it's going for 5 in the evening, and I'm finally getting around to mending my skirt, my work skirt. I had to pick plums, obviously, edit that footage. I had to do a bunch of other yard work. I've been doing a lot of chop and drop the last few days. I also have been pruning in my orchard and injured my finger. So there's the produce that comes out of our garden, but then there's also a CSA share that I split with my sister. So I do the cooking, and she gets a share of the meal that is cooked with those CSA veggies, and sometimes mushrooms as well. Tonight's dinner is Italian white bean soup, salmon croquettes using wild caught salmon from Alaska, and a patty pan and green bean dish with a homemade tomato sauce. You can kind of call it a pasta sauce. I have a video on it. I actually use it on all kinds of things, meatball sandwiches, pizza, pasta, but also I really like it on top of just a veggie dish. And then a side of some pickles as well. You can see here, I don't know if you can see in the video, move my skirt. Right behind me here, I don't want to move my camera and make it fall, is my Instant Pot with the soup going on slow cook. I try to always cook outside in the summer and keep the kitchen cool if I possibly can. So now I'm ready to mend my skirt. I've talked about this a fair amount in the past, but you know, the clothes that we put on our body, the way that we source those clothes, how we take care of them, the size of our wardrobe, all of that has a real impact, especially in a fast fashion world where garment workers are exploited. They're exposed to all kinds of toxic chemicals, especially in the dye industry, where we know that a majority of the garment workers are young, usually young women of color who are massively underpaid, exploited for their labor. That, first of all, not participating in the nonsense of fast fashion with a fashion cycle that used to turn over once a year and then seasonally, and then it's now monthly and weekly. You know, Shein and all those other guys are just cranking out stuff. It's a rebellious act against a consumer culture, against an exploitive culture. It's solidarity with folks around the world to say, I'm not going to participate in buying from corporations that exploit their workers. An option that's not accessible for most people is to buy new garments. And it's always worse to buy new garments, right? Because they use more resources, they use a lot of water. We know that textile production uses a lot of water. We know that those pieces of clothing, that kind of a wardrobe is very expensive and inaccessible for a lot of us, right? A lot of us can choose to invest, and it is an investment in a few pieces that are of that price range and have that kind of, it's not really provenance, but have that kind of responsibility attached to them. For me, I almost exclusively have to thrift, like this shirt, which is 100% linen that I thrifted, which is great because then you're reusing things that are otherwise going to go in the waste stream. The vast majority of donated clothes eventually end up either in the garbage or end up shipped overseas and made some other country's problem. So thrifting is a great idea. It's fiscally responsible. No new, carbon is being emitted. No new water is being used. It's a very sensible option, but the styles are limited. I also make a lot of my own clothes. You might say, well, Angela, you were just talking about new fibers and, trying not to use new fibers. So I exclusively now buy Mendind, which is like rejects, seconds, damaged bolts of cloth. I don't usually buy a whole bolt, but yardage of cloth. And I also buy mill ends. That's how I get almost all my linen, are like the ends of a bolt or an end of a run that a fashion house was using or a brand was using. So often you can get very high quality linen, but it's only available in a few yards. Well, that's perfect for me as an individual sewist, right? I can only get 5 yards of this. Awesome. I can make a skirt and I can make a vest out of that, and like, cool. So this, for example, was this moss green, which I've never been able to find again, this exact color, because it was an end of a bolt and there was only 3 yards available. So I bought all 3 yards and I tried to make a no waste skirt out of it. So I only had a couple. It's very boxy and loose and comfortable. And I used thrifted elastic, which is now kind of almost shot. This needs to get taken in. Conveniently, I can just do that, take it in. But mending these clothes, choosing to develop the skills of mending, choosing to take time in our busy schedules to sit down, and it'll take me 10 or 15 minutes to mend this skirt here in a minute, is really a rebellious act. It says, I'm going to be intentional about carving out a few moments of my day to live a slow and sustainable life, that I maybe can't commit every moment of my day to living my ideals, to even being able to slow down, that there is the reality that I have to interface with a fast-paced world, right? We live in a fast-paced world. But I can honor those moments when I am able to push back against consumerism, push back against the fast pace. For me, mending really does that for me, because I have to stop. I can't really focus on anything else. I can listen to a book or a podcast, but I can't be multitasking when I'm sewing by hand. And then I'm saying, I'm taking a garment that somebody else might just throw away, and I am mending it and extending its life. I want to make sure, even though a skirt I wear constantly, and you would think like, okay, this is going to have a much shorter life because you're wearing it for heavy labor, you're wearing it for hikes. It's a couple years old, and I don't envision this being an item I will have in my wardrobe for 10 years. But when it's really threadbare and at the end of its life and I can't mend it anymore, then I can use it for rags. And because it's 100% linen, and the thread that I used is 100% cotton, which does mean that I will need to mend it more often because cotton is not as sturdy. It can all be composted. The elastic will have to go in the trash, but the rest of it can be composted and returned to the earth. So I feel really good about sewing my own clothes. I feel even better about mending my own clothes, keeping them in rotation, making sure that I don't have to add new garments to my wardrobe, that I can keep using this one. So as I looked at the skirt, I realized there was actually a split side seam as well as the split seam at the gathers in the front. So I had 2 mending jobs. I find that as I'm getting older, I have to take my glasses off in order to sew, and I really enjoy sewing out in the backyard because the natural light means not only am I able to enjoy the garden and the wind chimes and the birds in the backyard, but I'm also able to see better. I really enjoy sewing by hand, and there's no way to do this on a machine and have it be invisible. I really love hand finishing garments. For me, the process of sewing is as enjoyable as the finished product if I am sewing by hand. I often find sewing by a machine to be very frustrating, but hand sewing to be very meditative, very relaxing. If you watch some of my other videos, you might notice that I am using a leather thimble. I tend to alternate between using a metal thimble. This is one that I inherited from my great-grandmother, and using a leather thimble. It's just kind of whatever mood strikes me. Okay, and there is the side seam all repaired. It will iron out nicely, and I'm going to move on to the front of the garment. Okay, so here is the main tear. I have this gathered bottom of the skirt and then the top yoke, and the gather here, the thread has popped, and so I need to mend it. This is 100% linen cotton thread. Cotton thread is actually not that strong. So you can see here that I had a good seam allowance, but then I trimmed it back, so there's actually not much to work with. If you flip it to the inside here, by you I mean me, you can see I have a fully enclosed seam. I like to always enclose my linen seams because linen frays terribly, and that way it's all neat and tidy, and it will last a lot longer. You can see here I didn't bother enclosing or flatlining this. This is the selvage edge, so it's not going to run at all, and I don't mind that look on the side seams. But here for the yoke, I gathered all of this, and so in order to do that and enclose this seam, I did trim down the seam allowance after I sewed the bottom of the skirt to the yoke. So that's going to make it a little bit trickier, but not substantially. I'll just have to pin it. So I want to make sure that I catch the gathers up in between the layers of my enclosed seam. Remember, I have folded over and have this enclosed seam, so it has to go in between the layers so that it doesn't fray and unravel at all. Okay, so that's pinned. It is safely enclosed in the layers, and now I can sew it. And I want to make sure here that you see these loose threads from where the thread broke. I want to go back before that, and I want to make sure that I catch these so that it doesn't unravel on either side of my repair. So remember that this is a work skirt. It's already quite faded and worn, and it doesn't have to be a perfect mend. Sometimes I really care about having it be detailed and beautiful, and sometimes I just don't care. It's my skirt, so it's kind of what I decide that goes. And I don't have to please anybody but myself, as I said before. So I just want to get in here, and I want to make sure that I'm really picking up these loose bits here. So my mother really loved to sew, but she didn't teach me. In second grade, she basically, she could sew whole garments. She would love to sew costumes for me for Halloween and things like that. She would sew whole garments all the time, but she didn't really like to teach me how to do it, or maybe didn't have the patience to teach a child. So in second grade, I really told her I want to learn to sew, and I was sewing little dolly clothes, but they were just basically squares sewn together, little dolly blankets. And so in second grade, she gave me her sewing machine, and she showed me how to thread the needle, how to oil it, and said, have at it, good luck. And that's sort of how I learned to sew, entirely self-taught on the sewing machine. And then in high school, by the time I got into high school, I had made many quilts, some clothes. I did a lot of mending. I didn't sew that much by hand. I was really into quilting, and I was using my mom's 1954 Singer featherweight, which if you've seen some of my other videos, I have that sewing machine now and I use it. It is a workhorse. I love it much more than my modern sewing machine. It only does straight stitch, but I really love that sewing machine. So anyway, in high school, I took a quilting class at the local quilting shop, and I was the only person under probably, I don't know, I was 17, so it's a little hard for me to judge age, but I think everybody there was the age I am now or older. Mostly retired women in that group. I really, really enjoyed that group of women. They were really supportive. I learned a lot about sewing, more complicated quilting techniques, especially like math and measuring for fabric, and tips for making cutting quicker and easier. Kind of some more assembly line. I'm just going to go back over this another time, and then I'll come back and trim all these loose threads from the original busted thread. I'm just going to go back and whatever I want. This doesn't have to be perfect. It's a working skirt. I kind of like to make mending visible. I have a number of videos on visible mending, but this time, because I had a thread that matched, a cotton thread that matched, then I'm just going to go ahead and do this. I almost prefer to have visible mending on fancier items than everyday items. I know that's a little contradictory, that you want to have the patches show on fancier items, but I like to communicate that those things are worth saving. Not that this isn't worth saving, but as a work skirt, it is going to reach the end of its life. I have noticed there are some thin spots in it already, and as I said, it's quite faded. Thanks for letting me ramble while I sew. Okay, so thanks for hanging out with me. I would just encourage you, if you don't know how to mend your clothes, there's lots of good tutorials on YouTube. But more than that, like, just try. What's the harm in having a visible mend? If you are afraid of not being able to do tiny, neat little stitches that are invisible and well hidden, then pick something decorative. Put a bright colored patch on. Sew some lace over the top. Make it big and obvious. Why not? Like, why not just wear what you want? And I think that you don't have to be afraid of having to do something perfectly before you can do it. I had a lot of ugly mends. I still have ugly mends where I just don't feel like taking the time to be careful. I just really quickly want to put the garment back together. Sometimes, heck, I even have a safety pin keeping a split seam closed for weeks before I get around to actually mending it. And then when I do, I've got 5 minutes and it's just, and it's not super pretty. Sometimes I want beautiful, perfect stitches, tiny, well hidden, and sometimes I want something really decorative. And I would just encourage you have the freedom to do any of that range of things. And there's something really encouraging and enjoyable about knowing that what you're doing, it's a little bit of a thrill, that what you're doing is a rebellious act that is pushing back against our highly consumeristic culture and saying, I reject this idea that I have to be involved in this anxiety-filled rapid turnover of my clothing, and that I don't have to worry about the latest fashion choices. I can wear what's comfortable, what feels good on my body, what I enjoy wearing, and I don't have to cycle something out just because it's a new season or a new year. Something doesn't have to become obsolete. I can actually mend it and keep wearing it for the next several years, next decade, next 2 decades, and that's fine. That's more than fine. It's good. It's awesome. Okay, so now that my skirt is mended, I'm gonna change on my jammies and back into this, and I am going to go take my sister dinner. Please don't forget to click like and subscribe. I will be back tomorrow, if the video uploads correctly, tomorrow or Sunday, with a video about harvesting plums, because it is starting to be that season in my garden, and I'm really excited about it. If you could please click like and subscribe, and check out the ways that you can support this channel. There's a thanks button here. I have a Venmo and a PayPal and a Patreon in the video description right at the top. Your support means I can keep making content, and it literally helps my family pay. Like, y'all are literally helping me pay our bills. So I appreciate that voluntary contribution, and I hope in exchange that you are getting something worthwhile out of these videos. So, okay, I'll be back real soon. Bye-bye.